You know I love oil cans. I got motor oil running through my veins, and I'm glad to be here. I mean, it looks like a great show, and this looks like a great venue here.
Frank Fritz spent years opening other people's garages and uncovering their secrets. After his death, someone finally opened his. What they found inside has become the center of a bitter legal battle, raising troubling questions about Frank's final years and the decisions made before he died. As more details emerged, fans realized there was far more hidden behind those doors than anyone had imagined. Why was part of Frank Fritz's collection kept out of sight for so long? And why are people still fighting over what was left behind? Join us as we uncover what was discovered after Frank Fritz's garage was finally opened and the mystery it left behind. Knocked out. The farmhouse in Davenport, Iowa, was exactly the kind of place you'd expect Frank Fritz to end up. About an acre of land with 3 garages, a barn, and a separate shed. Every building carries some version of the same story. A man who never stopped collecting, never stopped finding things worth keeping. The kind of place where the doors haven't been fully opened in years, and the air inside still carries oil, rubber, and old wood. But on that July afternoon in 2022, none of that mattered. What mattered was what his friend Chris Davis found when he walked through the door. Frank had been hit by a deer while riding his motorcycle, the kind of accident that ends careers even when it doesn't end lives. The collision fractured his leg. A blood clot formed. While he made it home, he collapsed as soon as he walked through the door and remained unresponsive on the floor. He had suffered a massive stroke. Davis got him to a hospital. Within weeks, a guardianship petition landed in an Iowa court that made the situation impossible to misread. The emergency guardianship petition Davis filed in August 2022 was unambiguous. Frank's decision-making capacity was so damaged by the stroke that he could not care for his own safety. He could not provide himself with food, shelter, or medical care. Then one line that would matter more than any other. Frank had no living relative he maintained contact with. A court-appointed guardian took over his personal care, and a bank took control of his finances. Court documents would later reveal he was spending $30,000 a month on medical and in-home care. The man who had spent 15 years deciding what other people's things were worth now had someone else making those calls for him. Mike Wolf, Frank's co-host and the man he had built the show with, posted on Instagram asking fans to pray, calling Frank his old friend, saying he was heartbroken. Then silence. No updates from the network, no statements from anyone close to him. Fans speculated he had died, or was in a coma, or that something was being concealed. None of it was accurate. What was actually happening was harder and quieter than any rumor. His recovery kept stalling. Seizures, blood pressure crises, and a respiratory illness serious enough to put him back in a hospital bed. His spine had been grinding down for years from the physical reality of the work. Hauling motorcycles through barn lofts, wrestling cast-iron signs through attic crawl spaces. The stroke hadn't created those problems. It had just made them impossible to push through. The Crohn's disease he'd managed since his 20s kept going regardless. 14 months after the stroke, still under guardianship, still working through rehabilitation, Frank signed a last will. October 2023. The friends who were with him said he knew exactly what he was doing. His father disagreed. Bill Fritz didn't just question whether Frank had capacity. He told the Quad City Times the will was a forgery. What made his claim complicated was this. Bill and Frank's mother had divorced when Frank was still a boy, and Bill had moved away. Outside of Frank's mother, who died in 2013, the people closest to Frank were the friends he had built his adult life around. not the family he had grown up in. That courtroom bitterness has roots that go back decades, to an 8th grade kid in Bettendorf, Iowa, and a friendship that would eventually put both of them in front of 3 million people a week. The man 3 million people watched every week. Frank Lee Fritz was born in Davenport, Iowa, and grew up a few miles away in Bettendorf. By 8th grade, he had met a kid named Mike Wolf, who liked old things as much as he did. They weren't close right away, but they shared the same instinct, dragging home rusted signs and old bikes that their families considered junk. After high school, Frank took a job as a fire and safety inspector. Steady work that had nothing to do with what he actually cared about. But his days off told a different story. He was out on county roads, hitting estate auctions, picking through roadside sales. He started collecting motorcycles and eventually had more than 100 of them. He went to the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally for over 30 years running, by his own account. By 2002, he had quit the inspector job and opened Frank Fritz Finds, an antique store in Savannah, Illinois. In the mid-2000s, he reconnected with Mike, who had been working on an idea for years. After 5 years of pitching it to networks, the History Channel finally said yes. American Pickers premiered on January 18, 2010, and within 5 episodes, it was sitting at 3.3 million viewers per episode, the second most watched show on the entire network, right behind Pawn Stars. Frank was earning around $300,000 a season. Mike was the closer, the one who spotted the high-value piece and worked the seller until the deal was done. Frank was something different and something harder to manufacture on television. He wore flannel shirts and got visibly, genuinely excited over a hand-painted oil can or a wind-up toy from 1958. When a seller named a price that was too high, he didn't posture. He just told them the truth. For 11 seasons, 3.3 million people tuned in every week. By 2020, the show was still drawing the same audience. Frank wasn't. In a 2021 interview with the Quad City Times, Frank described living with Crohn's disease as living with a dragon. Always there, no matter what else was going on. He had managed it since his 20s. His back had been grinding down for years from the physical demands of the work. He later said alcohol had cost him his relationship and made his health worse. It wasn't a secret. He said it himself in a 2021 interview. In July 2021, the History Channel confirmed Frank was no longer part of the show. The official explanation was back surgery and recovery time. A year passed with no appearance and no update from the network. Then, in the summer of 2022, Frank gave a rare interview that quickly spread online, saying he hadn't spoken to Mike in 2 years. He said Mike knew about his back problems, but never called to check on him. He had felt like the number 2 for 11 seasons. Then, more than a year after the stroke, it was Frank who reached out first. What happened in that room when Mike showed up is the part of this story most people never heard. The man who asked first. In the spring of 2023, according to friends who were present and spoke to the Quad City Times, Frank was the one who asked for the visit. He was still in rehabilitation, over a year removed from the stroke, and he asked for Mike, not the other way around. A friend who was present described the visit to the Quad City Times. Frank had felt the distance, she said, but the reunion was his idea, not Mike's. When Mike walked in, both men cried. Mike told Frank that no one could replace him, that the show had been what it was because of Frank's humor and the way he made people feel like they mattered. This much is not in dispute. When Frank Fritz died on September 30th, 2024, at 8:50 in the evening, Mike was in the room. Mike posted on Instagram the next morning, describing Frank as someone who combined sensitivity with humor in equal measure, and said he considered it a privilege to have been with him at the end. The official cause of death, listed on the death certificate obtained by TMZ, was the accumulated neurological damage from the 2022 stroke. His heart, lungs, and brain had been quietly failing for months. The 2022 stroke had started a process that his body could not reverse. Annette Oberlander, a Davenport friend who had been at his side almost daily since the stroke, told reporters he had fought hard every single day to make it back, that he would make progress, and then there would be a setback, but that he never stopped fighting. He appeared in 308 episodes. The show is now in its 27th season, still airing, still without him. Frank's last will was signed in October 2023. At the time, he was still under court-ordered guardianship, a fact that sits at the center of the legal dispute, because Iowa law draws a distinction between guardianship over personal care and the capacity to make testamentary decisions. Under Iowa probate law, being placed under guardianship because you cannot feed or care for yourself does not automatically mean you lack the mental capacity to sign a will. The legal test for a valid will is narrower. Did the person understand what they owned, who they wanted to leave it to, and what signing the document meant? His friends argue that the guardianship protected him. His father argues it proves he couldn't legally bind himself to anything. Bill Fritz, Frank's father, filed a petition to have the will thrown out. He told the press the will was fraudulent, that Frank had never signed it, that the stroke had left his son without the mental capacity to make that kind of decision, and that he, as Frank's only blood relative, was the rightful heir. Bill claimed he was Frank's only real loved one, insisting that everyone else was just after money and had only worked for him. Frank's friends pushed back immediately, but the situation was already more complicated than family versus friends. A second petition to challenge the will came not from Bill, but from someone inside Frank's own circle, a female friend whose attorney entered the case in December 2024, followed by a separate petition filed the following February demanding that the will be set aside and a jury trial convened. Her name has not been made public, and the specific grounds of her challenge are sealed by court order. What is known is that when the trial begins in November 2026, both challengers will be in that courtroom. The friends defending the will point to the guardianship petition from August 2022, signed under oath, reviewed and accepted by a court, which stated that Frank had no living relative he maintained contact with. Bill said the guardianship itself was the problem, that the people surrounding Frank had cut him off from his own father. Both sides have lawyers. The case is sealed. But the question at the center of it is simple enough. Was Frank Fritz mentally competent in October 2023, or wasn't he? A jury has to answer that, and everything Frank ever owned is waiting on their verdict. Until that jury rules, nothing moves, including the one thing inside Frank's personal garage that nobody knew existed. The estate team that opened that door wasn't looking for it. They weren't even sure what they were looking at when they found it. The garage nobody knew about. The farmhouse property had been essentially sealed since the stroke in July 2022. When the estate team walked into Frank's personal garage after his death, they were stepping into over 2 years of undisturbed time. 2 years of dust had settled over everything. Neon signs were still wrapped in moving blankets. Tools sat on the workbenches where he'd left them the morning of the ride that ended his working life. A row of motorcycles lined one wall, tires flat, paint faded on some, preserved on others. Frank had spent his collecting life obsessed with bikes, over 40 of them in that garage alone, none ever listed for sale. They were part of the collection he was keeping. The rest of the space held everything else: model trains, vintage lunchboxes, wind-up toys, Antique clocks, rare signage, lamps, figurines, pieces of American commercial history that had passed through his hands and never left. The estate appraisers who cataloged the property, according to documents filed with the Iowa court, put the total value of Frank's estate at approximately $6 million, and the motorcycle collection alone accounted for a significant portion of that. The farmhouse itself, the acre of land and 3 garages where he had spent his last years, was valued at $155,000, a fraction of what was inside it. Near the back wall, there was a tarp. One edge of it had been thrown over carelessly, the way you do something quickly when you mean to come back and straighten it later. When they pulled it off, the light caught a long, low curve of deep red metal. It was a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, 2-door hardtop, black interior. The chrome had dulled with time, and the paint had lost some of its depth. But the shape of it, that wide, sweeping tail fin, the low stance, the unmistakable profile, was exactly what it had always been. According to people who knew him, Frank had found it years earlier at a swap meet. He wasn't there for cars. He was after motorcycle parts, maybe some signage, but the 1957 Bel Air was never just a car. It was the year Detroit got everything right at once: the fins, the chrome, the stance. A machine built to be looked at. Frank understood that instinct better than most. By the accounts of people close to him, he wrote a check on the spot and had it shipped back to Iowa. He never mentioned it once, not on the show, not in any interview, not in any post. This was the only thing in his life that was entirely private. Frank had spent 15 years reading what those open doors meant, what a man kept, what he sold, and what he never touched. He understood better than almost anyone that the things people hide are never just objects. They're a record of what someone valued when no one was watching. According to Haggerty's classic car valuation guide, a 1957 Bel Air 2-door hardtop in comparable unrestored condition typically moves between $80,000 and $150,000 at auction. More if the original drivetrain is intact. The appraisers cataloging Frank's estate flagged it as one of the highest single-item values in the collection. People close to Frank have raised the idea informally of keeping his most personal pieces together, a small foundation, a curated collection, rather than scattering them across auction houses. None of it can be formalized until the court rules. So right now, the car sits, right where Frank left it. Under a tarp he never got around to straightening. He kept the car hidden for years. He left a signed document saying exactly who should have it. Whether that document counts as his final word is what a jury in Iowa has to decide, and they won't even start until November 2026. $6 million and a jury. If the jury rules the will invalid, Bill Fritz, Frank's father, living in Texas, out of contact for years by the court's own record, inherits everything. The motorcycles, the signage, the antique clocks, the lunch boxes, and the 1957 Bel Air under the tarp. Bill says the stroke took too much, that the signature proves nothing, and that the people surrounding Frank in his final years controlled who got through the door. Frank's friends say that's exactly what the guardianship was designed to prevent, and that a man who spent 14 months in rehabilitation, with 2 court-appointed overseers watching every decision, knew precisely what he was signing. The guardianship petition was filed a full year before the will was ever written, before Frank had even left rehabilitation. While the case is active, Frank's friends say they have held back from organizing a public memorial, not wanting to act until the legal questions are settled. A friend told reporters the situation felt heavy and draining, that what should have been a moment of celebrating Frank's life had turned into something mired in conflict. Everything inside that farmhouse is frozen exactly where Frank left it. $6 million worth of things a man spent his whole life gathering. And none of it can move until a jury says so. Frank spent his career finding value in what other people had walked past, or forgotten, or shoved under a tarp, and never came back to. He could walk into a stranger's barn and recognize, almost immediately, what had been overlooked and what deserved to be seen. He did it for 15 years on television, and he did it every weekend before that, on county roads in Iowa with no cameras and no audience. That instinct never left him. Neither did the things he chose to keep. What he couldn't arrange was this. When he was the one who left things behind, the people he'd chosen and the father he'd grown apart from ended up in the same courtroom, each certain they knew him better. The jury in November 2026 gets to decide whose version of Frank Fritz is the real one. Who decides the will, the friends he chose, or the father he grew apart from? And what should happen to the Bel Air, sold with everything else, or kept apart, the way he kept it? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.